Hello guys, today I will explain negative theology. So let's start negative theology. Also known as apophatic theology, is a philosophical and theological approach that seeks to understand God or ultimate reality by denying what it is not rather than affirming what it is. This approach begins with the idea that the divine essence completely transcends human understanding, language, and conceptual thought, because every positive description, such as good, powerful, or existent, imposes finite, human limitations upon an infinite and transcendent reality. Instead of saying that God is good or powerful in the human sense, one says that God is not evil and not powerless, while his true nature infinitely surpasses every concept of goodness, power, or existence. This stands in contrast to cataphatic, positive theology, which employs affirmative attributes such as light, truth, or being merely as symbolic approximations, rather than literal descriptions of the absolute essence. This method emerged prominently within Christian mysticism and Eastern Orthodoxy to distinguish between God's unknowable essence and his manifestations, or energies revealed to creation. It also appeared in Islamic mysticism through thinkers such as Al-Ghazali and Ibn Arabi, under the principle, "There is nothing like unto him," emphasizing that the divine essence transcends even theological thought itself. Likewise, it appears within Jewish Kabbalah through the concept of Ein Sof, representing the infinite and boundless aspect of God. This naturally leads to a spirituality of silence, for the closer one approaches the absolute, the more one realizes the inadequacy of language itself. Although negative theology denies material limitations such as space and time, it nevertheless remains part of metaphysical discourse, because it still operates through concepts such as being, non-being, unity, transcendence, and existence. Negative theology functions as a method of dismantling every intellectual attempt to confine the Creator within conceptual boundaries. Every expression such as existent, omnipotent, omniscient, perfect, or even absolute originates from finite human language and thought. Consequently, negative theology does not merely deny imperfections of God, it denies the applicability of human concepts themselves when speaking about him. Even the concept of perfection as understood by the human intellect cannot properly apply, because God infinitely transcends that conception. Here arises the notion of pure nothingness, which differs fundamentally from ordinary nothingness, the mere absence of something that could have existed. Pure nothingness represents a reality beyond the original duality of existence and non-existence. Thus, the Creator is neither existent, according to our understanding of existence, nor non-existent. Rather, he transcends both categories entirely. When the human mind attempts to describe such a state, it reaches its absolute limit, where every concept collapses, and only silence remains as an acknowledgement of intellectual inadequacy. Nevertheless, negative theology itself is not ultimate reality. It remains merely a conceptual tool operating within the limits of language and reason. Its highest achievement is leading the intellect toward complete recognition of its own inability, demonstrating that ultimate reality lies beyond every definition, affirmation, and negation. Negative theology therefore maintains that the first principle or ultimate reality transcends every possible description and conception. Human reason can recognize that ultimate reality exists, yet it cannot comprehend its essence, because every definition imposes limitation, while the absolute admits neither classification, genus, nor species. Consequently, the nearest possible approach is through negation. God is not a body, not temporal, not spatial, not matter, not an idea, and not even existence as ordinarily understood. Within mystical traditions, the spiritual seeker gradually transcends every mental image of God, refusing attachment to names or attributes according to the principle, whatever comes to your mind, God is other than that. In metaphysics, the absolute stands beyond every level of existence and non-existence, substance and accident, because it is the very source that renders existence possible. Therefore, logical and metaphysical principles themselves do not apply to it, since it precedes them. Within religious traditions, every divine name expresses merely the manner in which the absolute manifests, not the reality of its essence. If this concept were applied to a fictional character, such a being would stand beyond time. space, dimensions, and every conceivable framework, existing in a state of complete perfection that transcends description, limitation, categorization, and logical containment, and within power scaling would therefore be classified as boundless. Negative theology is not simply the claim that God cannot be described. Rather, it constitutes a metaphysical deconstruction of every conceptual limitation imposed by reason, including existence, non-existence, perfection, power, knowledge, unity, multiplicity, time, space, causality, and logic itself, because all of these concepts exist only within a particular system, whereas the absolute is not a part of any system whatsoever. The path of negation ultimately reaches the point at which every classification collapses. Negation itself is not a description of the absolute, but merely a means of purifying the intellect from false conceptions. Once this process of negation is complete, no concept remains applicable. This is why negative theology is closely associated with ineffability and complete transcendence over thought and language. Even the philosophers of negative theology consistently emphasize that it is not the destination, but only a method pointing toward the absolute, without ever containing it. Therefore, if within a fictional verse one being embodies negative theology, yet another being transcends, even the processes of affirmation and negation themselves, or regards negative theology merely as a concept or stage contained within its own existence, then that second being would, by definition, completely transcend negative theology itself, a notion that is entirely possible within power, scaling, and metaphysical frameworks. Even if a person reaches the highest level of divine transcendence and declares that God resembles nothing and cannot be described, the very act of making that declaration still operates within the structures of human reason, thought, and language. Consequently, every form of theology, whether affirmative through predication or negative through negation, is merely a path or instrument rather than the final goal. To stop at either is to transform it into yet another veil. Ultimate reality is not simply another concept within the system of concepts. It is not ultimate because it stands at the end of a chain, but because it precedes the entire chain itself. Affirmation cannot encompass it. Negation cannot encompass it. And even silence cannot encompass it. Furthermore, even the statement that it transcends affirmation and negation remains only an intellectual approximation expressed through limited human language. Ultimate reality therefore transcends both positive and negative theology and stands beyond the very origin from which such conceptual distinctions arise. Perfection is itself a concept. Greatness is a concept. Transcendence is a concept. Negation and affirmation, existence and non-existence, are all conceptual structures existing within human cognition. The divine essence, however, is the very source from which these concepts derive the possibility of existing at all. Consequently, the real question is not whether God transcends perfection or negative theology, because the question itself already assumes that such concepts are valid measures. Divine reality is always greater than every expression, every methodology, every negation of negation, and every conceivable philosophical, metaphysical, imaginative, or existential framework. All philosophies, metaphysical systems, imagination, and reality itself are ultimately nothing more than signs pointing toward the inadequacy of human understanding. In conclusion, God glorified and exalted is He absolutely transcends and precedes everything without exception, eternally surpassing perfection itself, all concepts, positive and negative theology, and every conceivable intellectual, imaginative, or ontological framework.